Most people thought the Kyoto Protocol was done, buried after the Paris Agreement took center stage in 2016. But guess what? The International Court of Justice just ruled that it's still legally valid, and that changes everything. In a surprising decision, the ICJ said countries that signed the Kyoto Protocol are still bound by its rules. And get this, non-compliance with those rules could now be considered a violation of international law. So, what does that really mean? Let's back up. The Kyoto Protocol was finalized in 1997 and came into force in 2005. It was the world's first legally binding climate agreement, designed to hold wealthy nations accountable for greenhouse gas emissions. It set specific emission reduction targets for developed countries, while encouraging developing countries to take voluntary steps. Under Kyoto, countries like the US, Canada, Japan, and members of the EU were supposed to cut emissions during 2 commitment periods, from 2008 to 2012, and from 2012 to 2020. But the system didn't go smoothly. The US signed the Kyoto Protocol but never ratified it. Canada eventually withdrew. Japan refused to commit to the second period. Meanwhile, China, though the world's largest emitter by the mid-2000s, had no binding targets, since it was still considered a developing country. Because of all this pushback, the global community looked for a more inclusive approach, and that led to the Paris Agreement in 2015. The Paris model is bottom-up. Instead of assigning targets, it allows each country to set its own climate goals, known as Nationally Determined Contributions, or NDCs. The assumption was that Paris had replaced Kyoto. But legally? That never happened. No one formally terminated the Kyoto Protocol. It just faded into the background. Until now. In a request from the UN General Assembly, the ICJ was asked to give its opinion on what countries are legally obligated to do to fight climate change, and what happens if they don't. And in its ruling, the ICJ made something crystal clear. The Kyoto Protocol still exists. It has not been terminated, and failure to comply with its rules is an internationally wrongful act. In fact, the ICJ even said countries can still be evaluated for whether they met their original Kyoto targets, especially from the first commitment period. This is huge. It reopens the conversation about accountability. And while the ruling is technically an advisory opinion, not legally binding, it still sets a global legal precedent and could fuel new waves of climate litigation. So why does this matter? Because it puts pressure back on developed countries. Those that historically emitted the most carbon are now being reminded that they still have legal responsibilities under Kyoto, not just Paris. The court reaffirmed the common but differentiated responsibilities principle, meaning, yes, everyone needs to fight climate change, but rich countries have to do more, since they caused most of the damage. What's next? Legal experts say this ruling could empower activists, small nations, and vulnerable communities to demand climate justice, and possibly even seek compensation for climate-related damages. In other words, the Kyoto Protocol isn't a relic, it's back on the table, and countries may now be forced to answer for commitments they made decades ago. Let us know in the comments. Should countries still be held accountable under Kyoto? Or should we move on with Paris? If you like the video, then don't forget to subscribe. It really motivates us to create helpful videos.